the great what-if game. What if, Cody Delmendo, the Cubs had signed Bryce Harper in 2019 as a free agent? Why do we bring it up? It's an old scar. It's an old wound. Everybody thought they were going to get him in 2019. Chris Bryant's best friend, and then it didn't happen.
His dog name was Wrigley.
Dog's name Wrigley. And he'd been tweeting stuff out, kind of like hinting that maybe the Cubs were his team. Then he talks to my buddy Patrick Mooney at Wrigley Field before this Phillies series over the weekend. And he admits, yes, he was thinking about the Cubs. It was no secret. He said, quote, going into that offseason, they were the number one team on my list without a doubt, end quote. Telling Patrick Mooney of The Athletic, how bad does it hurt?
Well, when I read the article, I warned people that they should probably crack a beer before they actually read it. I wish that if I could go back and redo it, I would crack a beer and then read it because it's painful. There's a lot of reasons why Bryce Harper is not a Chicago Cub. You can look at the Cubs' inability to develop their own homegrown pitching at least a respectable way. It's not even just pitching, just even like position players. Like their farm system was in absolute shambles towards the end of the last decade. And the reason I say that is because you had the core from 2016, but a lot of those guys hadn't continued to keep getting better as years went on, and that showed on the field with the team. And you thought that, well, if you added Bryce Harper, that would help a lot, obviously.
Because the offense was, quote, broken.
Yeah, after 2018.
According to Theo.
Yeah, and the reason that I say, not being able to develop your own position players and stuff like that, it's more so it's about the fact that there was no real, we don't know what's going on here right now. And so just maybe the Cubs thought that they were going to start rebuilding earlier than what we even thought. Then the pandemic season happened, and who knows what would have happened if the pandemic didn't happen. But I think the large thing is that Tom Ricketts just decided to close the pocketbook.
He did, as the renovation was also getting more and more expensive, and they didn't know what they were going to do with the contracts of the young guys that were their core players at the time. Because they weren't playing well, they weren't thinking about, do we give so-and-so? They got close with Javi right before the pandemic. Harper ends up signing 13 years, $330 million. And one of the reasons it hurts the most, especially now, obviously he went on to, win a World Series with the Phillies. He's had great success.
He didn't win. He went to one.
He went to a World Series.
To a World Series.
Excuse me.
Not that it matters, but.
But now you look at the other contracts of guys, and you see Soto for $15, $765. Vlad, $14 for $500. And his AAV of $25 million a year is basically the same deal that you gave Dansby Swanson. Mm-hmm. And you see the Kyle Tucker thing on the horizon, you say, yeah, it's a lot of money. And, well, you know what? $330 at that time seemed like a lot of money, and 13 years seemed like a ton for Bryce Harper.
He was one of the first players to get over $300 million. It was Giancarlo Stanton and then him and Manny Machado in the same offseason.
But now when you see it and the inflation in baseball, you say to yourself, wow, what a bargain. They're getting Bryce Harper at $25 million a year. And he's, since he's joined the Phillies, he's been a 24.2 WAR player, Baseball Reference. He's hit 157 home runs, almost 500 RBI, batting average of 283, slugging 530, and an OPS of 921. Would that fit pretty well at $25 million a year?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's why you don't want the Cubs to make the same mistake again with Kyle Tucker.
Absolutely.
You clearly made a mistake. And by the way, there's some quotes in there. If you remember the CNBC interview, and even go back to Cubs convention
with Tom Ricketts.
There was talk from Jed, and there was talk of Tom. There were some moves that we kind of regret not making, and ones that got away. They also had the 8-year 184 with Jason Hayward that they were thinking about. But some of the quotes here, let's see. Telling Patrick Mooney, he said that Tom Ricketts had said, we spent a lot of time thinking about what Bryce Harper's worth was as a free agent, Tom Ricketts said. That's one that we kicked around that obviously we never executed on. And Harper talks about how one of his buddies sent that to him and was like, man, what the heck? Why does he got to say this? You know, and he's just kind of thinking back about the process, and also the fact that he last year at Thanksgiving ran into Jed Hoyer at a restaurant in Nashville, and they were talking about the what if game.
Yeah.
You know, and to me, that's what led to Jed's kind of like, well, I've got some moves, you know, that's because it flashed back to him. And you wonder to yourself, now, is this part of the reason that Theo took off and left? Would Theo have stayed if he had been able to spend the money on Bryce Harper and switch things up? And
well, I think
you figure they wouldn't have traded all those guys, by the way.
Sure.
Somebody would have been in here with a bad contract.
If they had signed Bryce Harper 2021, the trade deadline probably doesn't happen the same way, at least. Maybe they trade Chris Bryant and Javi Baez. But I think they keep Anthony Rizzo, or maybe Kyle Schwarber is still here. Whatever. But I think to what you're saying, the other side of it is with Theo, he always said that 10 years was the longest.
Right, yeah, he said it coming in.
So, you know, who knows? But he left a year early, and, I mean, you don't have to say it to our faces, Theo, but it was, you know, you weren't allowed to spend the money. The fans started getting mad at not only at Tom, but also at you.
Yeah,
because
and you were going to have to trade
contracts.
some of your buddies.
Yeah, and my biggest thing on Theo is in terms of the back half after the World Series is, you know, you were so well renowned for building teams, and he did a great job building the Cubs the first 5 years, but the back half goes back to what I said. They were terrible at developing and scouting. They could not develop a pitcher if their organization depended on it. And so we wouldn't sit here and think, what if so much, probably, if the Cubs could have just, you know, kept developing players and stuff like that. And that's why I've emphasized that a lot now during this current era of baseball that we're in. You know what I mean?
He's a known commodity.
Right. So the biggest thing I'll take away from all this Bryce Harper stuff, and you already said it a little bit, but you cannot make the same mistake with Kyle Tucker, man. You cannot do it.
And he's in the door this time.
Yes.
He's got a foot in the building.
He's playing at Wrigley Field every day, man. You got to find a way.
And it is going to cost you more than $330 million. Yeah. He also told The Athletic, Harper told Patrick Mooney, it was definitely something that I talked about, wanting to play in Wrigley Field, wanting to play in Chicago. One of the better meetings I had was with the White Sox on the other side of town. It just didn't pan out that way. Obviously, I'm extremely happy with where I'm at in Philadelphia. So he goes on to that. He doesn't blame the Cubs for not doing it. He just says, you know, it wasn't the right time. They had other things going on. They had the highest payroll in the National League going into 2019. But it was no coincidence that his best friend was on the team, that his dog's name was Wrigley, and that he was posting pictures with Chris Bryant and Chris Bryant's wife and all that stuff. He says, it's still my favorite visiting place to play. Just the vibes of Chicago and Wrigley Field in the Ivy. When the wind's blowing out, it's not great, but it's just such a fun ballpark. The crowds show up, bleacher creatures out there. It's just always fun listening to what they have to say behind me in right field. A summer day in Wrigley, man. It's one of the best baseball atmospheres in the league. And that's the last twist of the knife.
And one last thing, I hear a lot of fans say this, like Jason Hayward, like, where was he gonna play? You find a spot to play Bryce Harper because he's Bryce freaking Harper, brother.
Yeah.
All right.
Well, and also the DH was coming, and that's the same argument with the Schwarber stuff for me. Is listen, we had the smartest front office in baseball. They knew the DH was coming. Wait it out, man.
Yeah.
Wait it out when that deal's available. Anyways, it didn't happen, but the great what if game with Bryce Harper. A new chapter, thanks to our buddy Patrick Mooney.